All right, welcome to video number 1 in the 3 core videos on Daniel's 70th 7. There's a short video if you're looking for that. It's not these 3, certainly not this one. Different video that does just a brief overview, as brief as possible, with some context for people who are unfamiliar with the Daniel's 70th 7. So that's a different video. These 3 videos are going to do a deep dive on the 70th. Not all of Daniel. We have other videos that do deep dives on some other passages in Daniel and other related topics. But these 3 are going to be the 70th 7. So the first video here, we're going to cover the scripture itself, Daniel's chapter 9 and chapter 12. And then the second video, we'll do the detailed math on the 69 and talk about some related issues. And then the third video will be the deep dive on the 70th itself with all of its math and calendar details. So let's dive in. So we start in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, and we start reading about the 77s. So 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So the first thing that we note is that the sevens are not specified. The time unit is not specified. So it doesn't say 70 blocks of 7 years or any other thing. It says 70 sevens. There are 6 things here that are covered that are key redemptive accomplishments, you could say, that are going to take place during this period of 77s. The first one is finished transgression. So it's for the holy people, for your people, your holy people, your people and your holy city to finish transgression. What does that mean? It's Israel filling up the bowl of their transgressions. Okay, you can see this in the Old Testament. You can also see it in a lot of things that Jesus said in the Gospels, where there is a measure of sin that God is waiting, he's patient and there's mercy. But there is a point at which that bowl is filled up. It says that of the nations in Canaan back in the Old Testament, at the time of that, some of those groups was not fulfilled yet, and God was waiting. But then at some point that bowl is filled up, and then usually, unfortunately, becomes a bowl of wrath that is poured out on the people that filled it up. So there's a concept here of finishing transgression. There's put an end to sin. So Hebrews and Romans will weigh heavily here in these next few items. I would say if you want to kind of get a feel for how these 6 are all fulfilled in Jesus, just go read the book of Romans and read the book of Hebrews. Put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So he definitely put an end to sin. Jesus did on the cross. To atone for wickedness. His blood atones for all sins. Everybody agrees on that. Believers, that is, Bible-believing Christians. So don't need to spend time there. Bring in everlasting righteousness. Sometimes these 3, the latter 3, is where people maybe start to say some of these things were not fulfilled at the cross. I'm going to be making the point that they are fulfilled at the cross, and the entire 77th period is focused on the cross and some of its aftermath. And the dates are going to prove that out. But bring in everlasting righteousness. Corinthians says, in him we might become the righteousness of God. Again, read Romans. It's full of this concept that by faith we receive the righteousness of Christ. We're placed in him. So certainly righteousness, and it can't be conceived of as a temporal righteousness by any stretch. So everlasting, even though that word is there, and sometimes we think, well, we're not in the everlasting time yet. We certainly have been given righteousness that itself is everlasting in Christ, who is everlasting. So the New Testament certainly bears this phrase out as well as being accomplished at the cross and resurrection. Seal up vision and prophecy. This is another one where it starts to get a little fuzzy, and there gets to be more debate about, well, is this fulfilled in Christ or is it not? Is it fulfilled in the distant future? Is it some of both? But Jesus certainly said all the law and the prophets are summed up in him. The New Testament gives pretty weighty evidence to this principle that all of the Old Covenant scriptures were fulfilled, and in the sense fulfilled in him and his death and resurrection. So where there's still some debate as well, but maybe there's some Old Testament prophecies that are dual, that focus that in the first coming and the second coming are kind of combined, satisfy all of those things. We're not going to unpack all of those things now, but suffice it to say, our interpretation of the 70 and 7 definitely leans toward A whole lot is accomplished at the crucifixion. A whole lot of revelation is about the crucifixion. And so I think Acts and the Gospels interprets a lot of those old covenant passages for us, and shows that they are in fact fulfilled in the first coming and in the crucifixions very specifically. The second coming you can think of as more of a mopping up exercise, but the authority that Jesus comes with, he already has now. So all the law and the prophets summed up in him. And to anoint the most holy place. This is often thought of as, or in certain camps of interpretation, is thought of as referring to an actual building. Certainly the physical earthly temple did have the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. But also we read again in Hebrews and in the New Testament in various places that Jesus has entered into the real holy place in heaven, and he offered his blood, not the blood of any physical earthly lambs, but his blood. All of those things were representative of his real sacrifice and all pointers and markers for us to make sure that we don't miss his real sacrifice. And that real blood is placed in the holy place in heaven. So we can make the case, and certainly people can argue otherwise, again, and they do. But at first reading, what we're going to try to do in this video is focus on the text and say, what is a plausible reading of this text? And certainly one cannot say from these 6 that there's no way that any of these refer to Jesus or his first coming. They're all very appropriately pegged there. Again, someone can say, well, they also can apply to the second coming, or they aren't fully accomplished in Christ. But you can't really look at any of these 6 and say, well, that has nothing to do with the first coming of Jesus. That's the point. It's very reasonable to read all 6 of these and say, yeah, those certainly seem to have to do with Jesus, and specifically the first coming, first advent, and his death on the cross. So that's how we're reading verse 24. Verse 25, now we start to get into some of the timing aspects of the 77. So it says, know and understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So that becomes the starting point of the entire 77s. We'll see that it's the specific passages about the 69, but that's the starting point of the whole thing, from the issuing of the decree. And also notice it says know and understand. So there is a desire here, even though Daniel gets sealed. Revelation, by the way, unseals that. But the idea is this can be understood, that God wanted us to understand these things. It's written for us, and so we want to understand it. So that's the starting point. Until the anointed one. Okay, so that's point B. So there's an A to B sort of measuring rod happening here for the 69 sevens, that until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 and 62. So now we see a partial section of the 77s. The 7 and 2 are paired, but they are distinct. So it mentions 7 sevens and 62 sevens, and so they're kind of linked together there, covering this whole time. The 7 generally refers to the rebuilding period, and that fits with Nehemiah. People may be familiar with Nehemiah and rebuilding the wall, and it was. I'm going to put this one up. Oh, let's not do that. That it will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. So the harassment that Nehemiah and his colleagues experienced from the local nations that were resisting their rebuilding of the city and the walls. So that troubled time is that period, and it aligns pretty well. There's not really a specific date that is referenced here, I think, nor is there a key date. If you do the math on the 7, where that date lands is not a significant date. So I think that it's just pointing out that generally that period of 7, what we later will learn is a 7-year period. 7 times 7 is 49, so roughly 49 to 50-year period is about the period during which that rebuilding happened. There's not like a singular day that is the finishing of that rebuilding, but I think that's okay. The point of this passage is similar to Daniel's other chapters. Actually, there's a roadmap. You see kind of 2 distinct chunks happening in most of Daniel's visions, and it's basically an empire map or some kind of earthly temporal sort of map, if you will, or a red carpet that's rolled out until the time of Jesus, and then that time is zoomed in on. That actually is what the 70th 7 is, which we'll see later. So the 7 here is not the point. The point is the 69 and the arrival of Messiah, but that rebuilding period roughly does fit with that 49-year period. Okay, verse 26, after the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death. So the 70th starts getting described here. It doesn't get key dates or markers like the 69 did at first, and it doesn't say that it immediately follows the 69. So it does not require contiguity. The text does not clearly state that the 70th has to follow exactly, the end of the 69 plus 1 day. Again, it's a reasonable assumption, but it doesn't require that. It doesn't say it that way. The word is after, and so as long as the things that are about to be described occur after the 62 sevens, which is really the total, so it's the 69 sevens, then it would an interpretation would be consistent as long as those things happen after the 69 sevens. We want to pay attention to this key phrase here, and we've got a couple slides here to address this. But the people of the ruler who will come. Okay, the same word for ruler here is the one that you just read about in the previous verse. Until the anointed one, the ruler, comes. The word comes also the same. So the ruler and the coming mentioned here, same words that are used exactly in the previous verse. So a simple reading, which isn't always the correct reading, but we want to start there. We're trying to just read through this thing and say, what does it tell us by itself? Let's not bring in any external assumptions, no biases. Let's try to read it in a very unbiased way. So the simple reading would suggest, there's nothing fancy in the Hebrew here that would say otherwise. It reads the way we would read in English. You would assume the people of the ruler who will come, and you just got told about a ruler who will come. The simple assumption is, oh, you're telling me something else about the ruler who will come that you just told me about. Again, it doesn't guarantee that that's the right reading, but we're going to start with that. That seems to be reasonable. I will also add here that the only reason that people introduce a new ruler here, because this is where a new ruler is introduced, many eschatological camps and schools of thought will introduce an Antichrist figure here. And whether they view that as, there's several different options for that. They'll view that as either Antiochus Epiphanes in the BC era, kind of before Christ. I forget the exact years. We cover Antiochus Epiphanes in a separate video and appendix in the document, so we won't cover it in depth here. But that's basically one. Another is some similar Titus or Vespasian, somebody in the 70 AD frame when Israel, when the temple was destroyed and burned and Jerusalem was totally destroyed by the Romans. And then the third is something in the distant future, some other future Antichrist that's going to come somewhere beyond where we are now, at 2026, as I sit here and record this video. So they're different ideas about what that other ruler might be, but they primarily get it from this here, that he will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And so, a natural reaction might be, well, the anointed one, the Messiah, he's not destroying the city and the sanctuary. He's coming to save. But we'll come back to that. The end will come like a flood. So the whole time period here, again, keep in mind those 6 things. It is the accomplishing of these things and the end of the age. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. So a flood, it will come like a flood, just judgment sweeping away. That's what the flood did, Noah's flood. War and desolation have been decreed. Judgment has been decreed. War is going to happen. Something will be desolated. The whole thing will be wrecked. And it's a very bad end. So we know that there's something very significant happening that is talked about as an end of something. So often thought to be the end of time. We're going to make the case here that it's not the end of time, it's the end of the old covenant. Everything that Daniel is talking about, all of the visions are about the end of the old covenant and the introduction of the new covenant, all the way back to the beginning of the book where he has the vision about the kingdoms and the kingdom from God that was not cut from human hands, from the rock or the mountain, comes and crushes the others and then grows to be a mountain that fills the whole earth. So the backdrop of this prophecy are several other prophecies or visions that are in Daniel that are all about the same thing. And it's the arrival of this new kingdom. And that necessarily implies also the ending of the old, which we'll talk about at length. So not until verse 27 do we have really the formal introduction of the 70th seven with the phrase 1-7. So he will confirm a covenant with many for 1-7. So now we had the 69. Now we finally see very explicitly the last one. And we get some timing indicators. So in the middle of the 7, so we don't hear anything about the exact start date of the 7. What we first start hearing are some descriptions of the 70th 7, and that it in the middle of it, He will put an end to sacrifice and offering. So here I want to introduce a concept. Let's introduce our friend, the sophomore Bible student, okay? And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to convey this, nor do I think a person off the street, so to speak, that's never heard of the Bible would come here and know what to do with a lot of these phrases, okay? But neither do we have to necessarily be a theologian, have a PhD, an MDiv or something, and have studied this for years upon years. Certainly there's value in that, not disrespecting that at all. What I'm saying, though, is when we read Daniel, just like we read other things in the Bible, we should start with the basics, and we should take what we know, and we should assume that lots of things are about Jesus. That's one principle. So if we ask our sophomore Bible student, you're not a freshman, you didn't just start reading the Bible yesterday, so you've read through the Bible, you're familiar with some of the basic concepts. With that background, what would you think of when you read this phrase, put an end to sacrifice and offering? Well, first off, what is sacrifice and offering? We can understand it as there's an old covenant system. There was the law of Moses. There were sacrificing of lambs and goats, and the sophomore Bible student, by the time they're at this level, knows that all of those things point to Jesus. They point to the Messiah. Israel knew that and was looking for the Messiah, so we're not like reading that in as modern 2026 year American Christians or anything like that. They knew that those things were pointing to something, and the prophets were pointing to something that was going to come, and that was the Messiah. So we have a basic understanding of that. So who authorized that whole system, and who authorizes sacrifice and offering? God does, right? Again, sophomore Bible student, God does. Who can put an end to it? And by end, we notice that this doesn't say an interruption. It doesn't say he'll interrupt sacrifice and offering or disrupt it. It says put an end to it. So if God inaugurated that, who's the rightful person who can bring an end to it and put an end to it? Now again, keep in mind we read about in the first 6 things that are the umbrella of this whole vision and prophecy is the accomplishing of those things, which very much described messianic things, right? Jesus is the one accomplishing all 6 of those things. And so in that context, what would we naturally think of? Put an end to sacrifice and offering. Who can put an end to it? Only God can. Has he done that, or will he do that in the future? Do we know anything about that? Again, we should say as a sophomore Bible student, yeah, well, Jesus is the end of sacrificing, right? And offering. That as soon as he was offered on that final Passover in 33 AD, there was never any need to sacrifice a lamb anymore. So Jesus is the end. Jesus on the cross, more specifically, is the end of sacrifice and offering. Okay, so again, may not be right. We may have to overturn this simple understanding later, but as a simple reading, that's a very plausible way to understand this passage. Okay, now we get into some of the crazy stuff. At the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Now, we have a whole appendix in the document and a whole video doing a deep dive on the abomination that causes desolation. So I am going to try very hard not to do that deep dive right here in the middle of this video. But I feel like this is one of the places, I think it's the only place I'm going to do this, provide some interpretation or inject a little bit of interpretation instead of I'm trying to just build all the verses one piece at a time. Then we look at all of those verses and say, okay, what can we conclude if we piece some of those verses together? So we're trying to just build little by little the understanding straight from the text and not come in with any assumptions yet and sort of show you how we arrive at the things we arrive at from an interpretive standpoint. But this one is, obviously this is a well-known phrase, much talked about, much debated. And so we are going to unpack it a little bit here, but just know there is a deeper dive, and I'm going to try not to get into the deep dive at this point. Have no idea how to pronounce that. We'll just call it Shekutz Meshomim. It is a cause that produces an effect. Okay, so the abomination that causes desolation, it is the abomination that causes the desolation. Nothing fancy there. But what we want to think about is that in Daniel's frame of mind and in the context of these prophecies, causation must be covenantal. It's not physical. Okay, it's covenantal. What God is concerned about is the covenant, and specifically the violation of the old covenant and the ending of the old covenant and the introduction of the new covenant. You know this as a sophomore Bible student, that there is a new covenant and we're in Christ now. All believers are in Christ. Jew, Gentile, slave, free, male, female, none of that matters. So the New Testament is clear that the new covenant is a big deal, and Jesus came and brought that new covenant. He inaugurated it. You can go back and read the Last Supper and the things he told the disciples at the Last Supper, that this is the covenant, this is the blood of the new covenant. So he inaugurated those things. So when we're talking about Daniel, we want to talk about covenantal things. Again, look at the top of verse 27 here. He will confirm a covenant. So it's covenantal context, not physical. I'm going to go ahead and give you the punchline here, again, because we have a full treatment of this later. But Jesus crucified is the abomination that caused desolation. Okay, that desolation has happened already to Israel and Jerusalem and the old temple. Again, I try hard not to unpack it, but just for a second, think about what is the most abominable act you could possibly think of in all of human history. And it's going to be this, okay? You could think of some horrendous treatment of women and children, maybe is going to be up there, and that's fair. But from the perspective of all of human history and global cosmic things, doesn't it make sense that Jesus on the cross is the most abominable thing you could possibly imagine? It's not just that he died there, a gruesome death, but it's also that he was placed there by the very people who were expecting the arrival of the Messiah since way back here in Daniel and even further back, had been looking for him, had the prophets, had all of the stuff of the Old Testament and the Old Covenant pointing to him. And so for him to end up there is the most abominable and shocking, right, cosmically shocking event in all of history and ever will be. And again, side note, that this is going to come out more later, but this event is the central event in all of human history, not even the second coming. That's more the cleanup exercise. He's coming back in the full authority that he already has, that he purchased at the cross. Okay, and the New Testament will show us that. We'll have videos and a whole separate document that covers Revelation. Can't get into that now. Again, there's some other things that back up this idea, this interpretation that Jesus on the cross, that the crucifixion is the abomination. We're going to see a little bit of it here in Daniel in a minute. Another thing here is there's an exegetical reading of this phrase, and it is to kind of put a comma there. So in English, it'd be like the abomination, comma, namely its desolation, or the abomination, comma, specifically its desolation. Okay, so there's two different things, right? Sorry about that. So there's a concept here of two different things. There's the abomination, and then there's the desolation that is caused by it. And we'll see in some other passages that actually they're sometimes being viewed as sort of an event complex, we could say, that they both go together. They're flip sides of the same coin, but that doesn't mean that they happen exactly concurrently in time. But the abomination happens, and it has a desolation that is associated with it that is sort of its direct follow-up. Okay, I want to unpack verse 27 because we are here trying to do the detailed dive on the text itself. But again, full treatment is going to come later, so I'm going to just read you a few things here. What's on the screen here, you'll find these in most study Bibles at the footnotes. So if you go pull this verse up, you will see footnotes that are these few things. So I just want to show you that that's there. You can go read them for yourself. So the first thing is here in the phrase, and at the temple. At the temple, Hebrew, don't know how to pronounce Hebrew, literally on a wing. Okay, what that means, literally on a wing, is that in the Hebrew, at the temple isn't there. And that's not me making this up. It's not there. Okay, the word temple isn't there. And it's not like Daniel doesn't know the word temple. He does, and he uses it other places. There's a couple other places where this phrase is used in Daniel. I'll go ahead and tell you they're about the same thing. And where it uses sanctuary or temple is in a list of items. It's not the abomination happening in the temple. That's not what it says. Again, here the meaning is debated. Some render it on the wing of abominations or on the pinnacle of the temple. The Septuagint, and this is where I think this phrase came from originally. I'm no Hebrew scholar, but having done a little bit of reading, it's that the Septuagint, which is one of the really old translations, does translate it upon the temple. The phrase is difficult and may refer to the temple itself or to a wing extremity of the temple. Okay, it's a complicated verse. But it doesn't say temple there. It does not. That word's not there. It's on a wing. That's what it literally says. Abomination that causes desolation. Hebrew, we already covered that word. The same phrase appears in Daniel 11 and Daniel chapter 12, and it does. And there's a similar phrasing that applies to the same event in other chapters of Daniel. So as I said, I'll show over the course of the videos and is thoroughly covered in the document that all of Daniel is about the crucifixion and the ensuing aftermath of that crucifixion. It's not about the second coming. All right, traditionally interpreted as an idolatrous desecration, okay, Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. Again, I'm going to cover that more in depth later. What I want to mention here is a concept that, let me actually check here, next slide. Yeah, let's go ahead and read this one and then I'll make that comment. So, until the decree that is poured out on him, the antecedent on him, that means what does him refer to, that comes prior, is ambiguous in the Hebrew. It may refer to A, the desolator, B, the desolated one, C, the one who confirms the covenant. So it's like, who does that he refer to, okay? And the answer is it can be several things there, and so we don't know for sure. It could be, as the note here says, on it, until is decreed is poured out on it. It could be until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator, okay? I'm going to use this to make the point, and again, covered in depth elsewhere, but there's a phrase in the New Testament where it uses similar terminology because Jesus is talking about the same thing. It's the so-called Olivet Discourse. And it talks about, there's a phrase that when you see him standing where he ought not be. Okay, so there's definitely language there that, and plenty of other commentators suggest that the abomination is a person. Okay, that's one thing. What I want to point out here is that the whole idea of the abomination that causes desolation, I think we've gotten it backwards, and I don't understand. Maybe some people will correct me. I'm sure there's depth to it that I don't fully understand. But if you think about it this way, the idea is usually that, well, it's some kind of Roman flag that gets held up, put up on a stick in the temple. And when the Roman legions put their flags up, those are an abomination. They have symbols that are not supposed to be there in the temple. Or it's Antiochus or some guy in the future who's going to sacrifice a pig on the altar and he's not supposed to be there. The pig is not supposed to be there. The whole thing is just wrong. Okay, that kind of stuff. Okay, that makes sense, but let's think about that a little bit more in depth. First of all, the abomination causes the desolation. If the abomination is the arrival of a Roman flag in the temple, when does the desolation happen? Oh, wait, it's already happening at the point that alleged abomination gets there. So there's got to be no real time difference between the abomination and the desolation in that kind of a scenario. And in fact, most commentators who ascribe to those kinds of interpretations would say as much. So they're looking for, when the temple is being destroyed or desolated, what is the abomination that is there going along with it? But the text doesn't exactly give a time difference between the abomination and the desolation, but I'm going to show you from the math once we get to the math in video 3. So stay tuned, keep up. Or you can go ahead and jump over there or watch the short video if you want the short answer. But the dates are going to show that this is going to be the case, that there is a gap, and that gap is the second half of Daniel's 70th 7, and between the crucifixion and the full measure of the judgment being poured out. But in any case, let's come back to the flags. If by the time a Roman flag reaches the temple, it's not as if God is sitting there and everything's fine, hunky-dory. The Romans are laying siege to Jerusalem. They're eventually working their way in. Lots of people are being killed. Terrible things are happening. But, once the flag gets put up in the temple, now that's an abomination that God is going to somehow all of a sudden get very upset about, right? That doesn't make any sense. Why? Because by the time the Roman flag gets there, the bad stuff's already happened, and you've already been judged by God. He's already judged the whole place and the situation. Otherwise, the Roman flags wouldn't have even gotten there in the first place, right? When the people of Israel were walking with God in obedience and living according to the law, and their hearts were pointed at him, no Romans ever made it to the front gates or to the door of the temple, or let alone got inside, right? Same is true for the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the whole 9 yards. So the whole idea that the temple or that the abomination would be something that happens right there at that same point doesn't make sense. By the time those kinds of events happen, God has already left the building a long time ago. Otherwise, the Romans wouldn't have even gotten there. So I think that whole category of things, people debate about, well, who is it, this guy or that guy? But the whole idea of the thing happening there in the temple at the point by the bad guy, doesn't make any sense in terms of these passages. And again, you can say, well, oh, that's your opinion. That's fine. We're going to see that the math actually is going to support what I'm suggesting here. The other thing I want to point out is just that if we go back one here, and again, we've got more treatment on this later, but I'm not saying that this verse clearly portrays the crucifixion, but what I think we can definitely say is if you take the different pieces and the fragments of these phrases and I'm no Hebrew scholar, but take what the Hebrew scholars have given us, which is, for example, that it's on a wing. It's not at the temple. It doesn't say the temple. The word is not anywhere in the verse. That should be a big deal. What picture do we get? Okay, and again, I can't help but give you a little bit of this, even though we're going to do it in depth later. If you ask a child, show me what on a wing means, show me what wings are, or show me, this is a little bit of a leap, but how do you fly like a bird? What is that child going to do? That child is going to lift their arms, right? And they're going to show you what wings look like. And so I think when you piece together the fact that it's on a wing, which is a phrase that nobody can really figure out what exactly does it mean, and it's an abomination, and the end is going to be decreed, that is decreed is poured out on him or it. I think all of the above, as far as the him or it, makes sense. Okay, if it's on the temple, yeah, judgment's going to be decreed. We're going to see that shortly. The judgment is coming, and on the temple and the city of Jerusalem. So that's definitely not an invalid, statement that those things are true. And so if that phrase is about that, that's fine. But also, there is a concept that was hard in the Old Testament, wasn't fully understood. It was hinted at in the prophets. Maybe this is one of those hints that, yeah, he's coming. Messiah. Again, the context of this is the arrival of the Messiah, the accomplishment of all of these 6 things. Oh, an abomination, though. He will set up the abomination. Again, it's associated with the bad guy. But what did Jesus say? He said, no one takes my life from me. No man takes my life from me. I lay it down myself. So he voluntarily put himself up on that cross. Okay? And the end, the decree of judgment is poured out on him. He took upon himself the sins of the world. He atones for wickedness. That's one of the 6 things listed in the first verse. So there is this idea that the desolation is poured out on him in the sense of him taking on the sin of the world. It's also poured out on Jerusalem because of its rejection of him, encapsulated and represented in literally this event. Their crucifixion of him is the encapsulation of their rejection of him. So I think you see in this, there's so much in this verse. That's why we got a whole passage about it, as well as tie into some of the other passages that reference the abomination, New Testament, as well as Old Testament here in Daniel. So that's enough said for now. Just felt like it's hard to pass over that phrase in this, teaching these passages without at least pointing that out. So is that an interpretive leap a little bit? Can you get that exactly from this verse? No. But what you do get from this verse is not the word temple. You don't get that here. And you get the idea that an abomination causes desolation. And for the desolation, I think a lot of interpretations equate the abomination with the desolation, which to me doesn't make sense. It's a cause and effect, and that's in the verbiage. That's implied that this translation is totally legitimate. Abomination that causes desolation, or an abomination, namely its desolation. They're kind of wrapped up as one thing, but one causes the other. And so to me, certain interpretations of Roman flags, it confuses the two. Like, the Roman flag isn't going to cause the desolation. That doesn't make any sense. The Roman flag's presence is the desolation at that point. Okay, enough. Let's move on. All right. So the great he debate that you didn't know was a debate, but it is. And there are 3 he's in this passage that you may have noticed. And we're going to go through them because there's debate about who they are and whether they refer to the same person or different people. I'm putting up here 2 different popular schools of thought. One is the preterist, which very briefly assumes most things or interprets most things in Daniel and Revelation to be about 70 AD and the destruction of the temple. There's some variability in that camp, as there are with most camps. Dispensationalists are the ones who believe that the tribulation is in the future. By the way, the tribulation is Daniel's 70th 7. So they shift the 70th 7 into the future and say it hasn't happened yet. And so they have a certain reading of this passage. And then ours, I'm putting here as the 3rd column. Okay, so everyone agrees that verse 25 is about Jesus, the Messiah. He's the anointed one. He's the ruler who will come. Okay, that's fine. he number 2 is the one where it says the people of the ruler who will come. Well, who's the ruler who will come? Actually, both of those groups believe that it's the Antichrist. Okay. Now, there are some people within the preterist camp, but I think I could be wrong because I'm not totally expert on any of these camps, but I think most preterists believe it's the Antichrist. I know there are some that do not, but I've read a lot of things that are debates between preterists and dispensationalists about number 3 here, and so I think both of them seem to take this one, he number 2, as the Antichrist, okay, which is some bad guy. We'll just call him a bad guy. He's going to come and destroy the city and the temple. I already mentioned that the simple reading of that verse, though, is the ruler who will come is the one in the verse just prior. All right, so then they say that the third one is the one who will confirm a covenant with many, and the dispensationalists say we're still talking about the Antichrist here. So he number 2 has to equal he number 3. The preterists say no, because the covenant making, they want to be Jesus, and so they say no, it's now back to Jesus. And the dispensationalists say, oh, that's crazy. You can't just jump around like that. It's got to be the same guy. And so, of course, their guy who's going to confirm a covenant is like a fake bad covenant with Israel in the distant future. We come along and say, I agree. Number 2 and number 3 seems like they should be the same guy. And then we'd also say, though, number 1 and number 2, there's even more reason to believe that those are the same guys. Why? Because we said the ruler who will come that we just heard about. And so we haven't changed there's been no introduction of a new person there. And so the same reasoning that gets argued to support number 2 and number 3 being the same guy applies even more strongly to number 1 and number 2 being the same guy. So if you put both of those together, a little bit of the, I think, mathematical associative property, if 1 equals 2 and 2 equals 3, then 1 also equals 3, and they're all the same guy. Okay? The will destroy is what trips people up, I think, is why historically there's been different interpretations of that. Again, maybe there's more to it, but to me, focused on this passage, and there's other passages, we'll cover those elsewhere. But for this passage, I don't know how you would come up with that idea except to be bothered by that the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay, but we're talking about covenantal causation. Okay, and actually, I'll go ahead and mention this here. It's not in the slides, but it's later. But if you're like, well, but that makes no sense, let me just tell you, go read the parable about the landowner who that Jesus gave of the left his estate in the hands of some caretakers, went away on a long journey, distant land. He sent a guy to go check on things. He got treated a certain way. He sent another guy. Eventually he sends his son. I won't give you the details, but go read that passage and you'll get an idea of how we're going to interpret this passage. It's not a common, again, we don't think about it because we're New Covenant Christians. We think grace and life and love and all those things, and those are all true. But read Jesus' words for yourself. There is a part of covenantal causation that results in destruction. Okay, moving on to chapter 12. Okay, 10 and 11 are covered elsewhere. But suffice to say, it's all part of one big vision. It comes back to it in chapter 12. How long until these astonishing things are filled? One angel asked another. And the angel answered, it will be for a time, times, and half a time. Okay, so time, times, and half a time. That's because you get time, times, and then half a time. So that's 1, 2, 3, and a half. That's where that comes from. Hopefully my finger demonstration is helpful to you. So that's where you get 3.5 times. Okay, 3.5 times happens to be half of 7. That's relevant. We're talking about 77s, right? So we've got these 7s and 70s and things going on. He says time, times, and half a time. Interesting. The most natural reading so far, again, we're not going to interpret the entire thing. I know I've done a little bit of that, trying not to. We're still talking about the 77. We haven't introduced anything new. We haven't gone back to the 69. So we should assume, okay, this seems to be something related to the thing that we're still talking about. How long until these things are fulfilled? Again, what things? In chapter 11, they gave a whole detailed empire history again, leading up to the 77, and then some of the same language again here about the end and the abomination and the accomplishing of all these things. Again, that's the thrust of the whole thing. When all these things be fulfilled? When will all these 6 things be accomplished? When will all this stuff have finished happening? Well, that's when. A time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has finally been broken. Now, again, we said there was an end, there was some judgment, war, desolations. Now we get more insight about what is this thing that's happening during this period. It's that the power of Israel, the nation, the Old Covenant Israel, is broken, finally broken. That sounds like final. Keep in mind there is some difficulty here, because we'd have to say, well, the holy people, but the New Testament teaches us, and the Old Testament actually does too, it was an Old Testament concept, and it carries over to the New Testament, that there is Israel, the nation, the ethnic nation, but then there was also within it the remnant, and that would be the people of Israel who were believing and faithful Jews or Israelites, contrasted with those who were not. So there is nation Israel, but then sometimes, as we know from Romans, it could refer to, a subset of that group. So we'd have to unpack that, but at a basic level, something here with the holy people is not going to go well once this times and half a time has taken place. Verse 11 and 12. So from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished, again, we've heard about that before, and the abomination that causes desolation, we have also heard about that before. When those two things happen, is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Okay, so notice that's the same event that we heard about before, and we're counting from that. Additionally, the word "and" connects these two. So these are two things that happen simultaneously. So they are from the time that A and B happen, meaning they're sort of the same. From that time to what? To the end. It's not stated here, but it was stated previously. From that time to the end. That's the whole thing under consideration, is from these key events happening to the end, and these bad war, desolation, etc., judgment happening, there's this much time. So that's another compelling thing, is that, what did we say sacrifice was abolished when? The sophomore Bible student knows, well, Jesus on the cross. Oh, apparently these things need to at least be happening at the same time, because this says the sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up. Again, the desolation can be separate and can follow on after that. But the two key events, abolishing of sacrifice and the abomination, are treated as one and the same event. That is, again, significant for this interpretation and is very challenging, you'll see, for other interpretations. All right, we get an extra little time marker here that for the 70th, that from the midpoint, which we just said was those two events, there will be 1,290 days. Now, I'll mention to you, if you haven't noticed yet, because I don't think we've mentioned it, if we take, actually, yeah, we'll go ahead and mention this because it's going to be more in detail in the next video, but the quick version is Old Testament Jewish and Babylonian calendars were 360-day years. If you do 3.5 years on that calendar, it's 1,260 days, not 90, 60. So the sort of 3.5 of 7 years on their calendar would be 1,260. You will see that number in Revelation. So that's relevant here as well, even though we don't see that specific number here. We do see 1,290 days. We also see 1,335 days. And that blessed is the one who reaches the end. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. So, interesting. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 12. What do we have so far? Again, we're trying to stick to the text before we get into all the interpretations of these things. I brought in one piece of interpretation, which is the abomination that causes desolation. But again, we saw that even if we don't know what that is yet, we know that that abomination goes with the ending of sacrifice. Those two are one and the same event, and there's some measurements happening from that time forward. Okay, 77s total, we know, and we don't know what time period those 7 are, though. We just know 77s. We have 69 of them are a measuring rod from point A to point B, from the decree that goes out to the anointed one arriving. Don't know what those are yet, but we know that there's some, from that point to that point, there's 69 of these 7s. We know that the 70th is separate. It was introduced separately from the 69. It also was described differently. It has its own internal structure. It has a midpoint. And then it has midpoint, sacrifice ceases, abomination occurs. Again, those happen at the midpoint of this period. And after the abomination midpoint, we have a few things that we know. We know war will continue to the end. We know the city and sanctuary will be destroyed. We know the end will come like a flood, so pretty bad stuff. We have seen that there's a half seven, that is time, times, and half a time, somewhere related to counting time from this one point to when this other stuff happens. And we have these two extra guys in verses 11 and 12, that the 1290 and the 1335, and that we're blessed if we wait for and get to the end of the 1335. And then finally, we know that the 70th final end involves Israel being broken, the power of the holy people being broken. So far, that's all structure. I'd say that's mostly structure. I gave a little bit of interpretation there. But again, we want to sort of try to read this text without bringing other ideas in and just see what does it tell us. It certainly doesn't tell us everything with clarity. If it did, there would be no debates and there would be no different schools of thought on this passage. So certainly there are different schools of thought on it, but trying to stick to the text and then build slowly with other passages of Scripture and see where we land. Okay, now that we've read 9 through 12, we want to sort of go back and say, okay, now let's put some of those things together. Can we build a second layer by saying, oh, we've read in chapter 12 something that helps us understand chapter 9, and so what can we sort of build step by step from that? Well, we can see that observation 1, we can see that put to death of the anointed one seems to correspond to putting an end to sacrifice. Okay, again, both of those can go together. Again, sophomore Bible student knows, the anointed one being put to death, that should be Jesus. In the middle of that, putting it into sacrifice also seems like the same thing. So we can say that seems to be the same event. It's the crucifixion. It would be the midpoint of the 70th seven. Theologically, I'll introduce this here. It's worth pointing out. We cover it in depth elsewhere. Theologically, it makes sense that you'd say, oh, the crucifixion is the midpoint of the 70th seven. Okay, that seems to fit, right? It's not relegated to some minor position. It's not something that doesn't have to do with Jesus that would be in the central focal point. So to me, theologically, this sort of starts to so far make sense. Like, yeah, it would make sense that the arrival of Messiah, which is the point, by the way, of the 77s in the first place, is from this time to this time, the arrival of Messiah. That's the big deal, and that is the context. And unless the text really compels us to start to go beyond that or outside of that, we should generally stick to that. So the crucifixion, sounds like the midpoint of the 70th seven, which is the culmination of the all 70. The 70th is the big deal, and the crucifixion as the midpoint of that seems very reasonable. So that's April 3rd, 33 AD. On the Jewish calendar, it is the day Nisan 14, and that becomes a very fixed point for the 70th seven. Again, that's our observation we're going to be working with. Observation number 2 is that these things that are described in multiple places destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. The power of the holy people will be broken. That sure sounds like a collection of bad things, and so we need to, whatever times we come up with trying to do the calendar math, better involve that. And so the second half certainly seems like it could include the fall of Jerusalem, and the ending of the Old Covenant, which happened in roughly 67 to 7 AD, was sort of the climax, although things were unraveling even before that. So that's an observation. Finally, we just are going to note that we have these two sort of things. The 69 all went together. There was that 7 and 62, but that wasn't a strong differentiator. The text never talked about that again. The 70th is described differently. It's introduced as its own 7, and so we have that as a separate entity. We have the 3 groups described differently. The 62 and 7, though, really kind of go together. They're not as independent as the 69 are from the 70th. And we see that it has these extra time markers there. So the 1290 and the 1335. The 69 don't have that. They just have a start and an end. But the 70th, because of these 2 additional points, have, in theory, a start and a midpoint and an end. We didn't really hear a lot of detail about the start. We didn't hear anything about the start. We heard a little bit about the end because it's supposed to be the end where bad things are happening. But then we have these 2 additional points out there. So we end up with 5. There's the start, the midpoint, the end, the 1290, and the 1335. So the 69 don't have any of that kind of structural, it has 2 dates instead of 5. The 70th has 5. So that's it. So that's the end of the text and some key observations that we can draw. And again, leaving the full discussion or full explanation aside, that's going to be video 2, as we're going to go through the 69 sevens. in detail and do the calendar math. It'll be all the gory details. We'll talk about how some of the other places to put that starting point. There are several different decrees that people are that can be of interest and possible candidates, and so we'll cover all that stuff in depth. And then the third video will launch into the 70th and take the methodology that you'll see that we find and learn in working with the 69 and apply that same methodology to the 70th. Because, spoiler here, the common understanding of the 69 as being 7-year blocks, which they are, and I agree with that, you don't take that number, oh, they're 7-year blocks, the 70th must be. We're going to show how did we decide that the 69 were 7-year blocks, and let's take that same decision-making process, that same methodology, and apply it to the 70th. And what we'll find very comfortably is that the 70th wouldn't be the same time period. We apply the same methodology, we get a different answer for what that time period should be. And we show all the dates. We do all the calendar math. So all that comes later. What we've got here is just that we got these two things. We've read the text. We've understood the 69. We understand the 70th, some of the things that are true about it. And then we can now set about doing the calendar math.